Truth be told, I've never liked the 7th console generation. And don't get me wrong, a lot of timeless classics came out on it across all of its systems, but there's no denying that when you zoom out of the niche stuff and look at what was truly there that defined it, unless you looked at the Wii, you'd see a wall of grey and piss filters, and shooters galore. There really wasn't much for somebody like me, who was into niche stuff like JRPGs. I mean, hell, I didn't even play the Call of Duty Black Ops games until last year. Yep, what we did get was generally pretty damn good. Sure, the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy was terrible, but in exchange we got Xenoblade, The Last Story, Atalia, Eska and Logi, Tales of Exilia 1, Lost Odyssey to name a few. Hell, even Korea gave us some pretty damn good stuff in the form of Magna Carta 2, a game I'd love to talk about in depth sometime. But amongst all of these games, there was one that always stood out to me even back then. Resonance of Fate, or End of Eternity as it's known in Japan, which is honestly so much better as a title. It's genuinely one of the most overlooked RPGs of all time, and today I'd like to tell you all about it. The game was developed by Tri-Ace, the same studio as Star Ocean and one of my favorite series, Valkyrie Profile, and it was directed by the same man as Valkyrie Profile 2, Takayuki Suguru. And what a strange career this man has had, only ever really working on 5 games, each stranger than the last. The first being a Satellaview exclusive game called Dynamic Tracer, then Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy Tactics, and of course Valkyrie Profile 2 and Resonance of Fate. The game started development under the codename Project Cobra, with 3 core principles for its design. The first being an emphasis on guns, the second being a focus on cinematic action, and the third was capturing the essence of action movies in an RPG. The extremely unique nature of the project piqued Sega's curiosity, and they ended up handling the game's publishing, with it finally being released in 2010, on my birthday of all days, January 28th, exclusively for the PS3 and Xbox 360. With the preamble finally out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. Resonance of Fate starts with one of the coolest cold openings to any game ever released, so I think it's only fair that we start here too. The opening cutscene is entirely voiceless and shows you everything you need to know through actions alone, culminating in a phenomenal fight sequence that perfectly captures everything that's to come, and it even foreshadows every single one of the game's themes, and then it finishes off in a spectacularly dramatic fashion. And then right after, you're hit with a second gorgeous opening that introduces the characters and world themselves. So let's talk about them. The game takes place entirely in Basel, not to be confused with the real-life city of Basel in Switzerland, which is really pretty by the way. A giant, entirely mechanical tower-like structure controlled by an entity known only as Zenith. Nobody actually knows what's beyond Basel, and every single person is assigned their lot in life right at birth, creating a very strict caste system wherein the higher on Basel you live, the more powerful your position, with the very top housing the cardinals, Basel's leaders. Naturally, this also means that every single backstreet is just full of gangsters and criminals trying to mug you. And man, Basel just looks awesome. The game unfortunately suffers from the 7th gen Grey curse, but they more than make up for it in its environmental and character designs. It's rare to see steampunk and video games, especially RPGs, and that was even more true back then. Everywhere you go has this metallic look to it, moving parts everywhere with gears and cogs all over the place, often obstructing the view with the sheer scale alone. Every layer of Basel takes on a distinct vibe despite the very little variation in color, and even if the character models themselves have some issues, the actual character aesthetic is fantastic and perfectly captures the contemporary fashion vibe they're going for. There's also character customization, and every single piece of clothing or accessory has its own made-up brand attached to it, giving it a sense of place in the world, kind of like The World Ends With You did. They work with the setting so much that it's practically a character of its own, and I love that. Enter the main trio, Vacheron, Zephyr, and Leon, who work as a group of handymen who'll take just about any job. And since all the rich folks are too busy sitting on their ass, they're able to get by just fine. The first half of the game is almost entirely centered around the three doing a variety of errands, from finding a bottle of wine to escorting a statue, and it's the trio's dynamic that really carries the game's entire narrative. The three bounce off each other extremely well, and you can really feel a sense of camaraderie in every scene. Zephyr is hot-headed, rash, and revels in the fighting, but his seriousness is often a front for a much goofier and more caring side. Leon is shy and wears her emotions on her sleeve, but becomes very confident when things get serious. And Vacheron is sleazy, but damn good at his job, and he knows it, while also feeling a great sense of responsibility regarding the other two. Needless to say, he's my favorite, and the way their dynamic is shown over the course of the game and its stark contrast between their dialogue in and out of battle is wonderful, without ever feeling out of place. You learn so much about these characters just from their little interactions amongst each other, and that's a great thing because from start to finish, they're the only party members you'll ever get in the game. The sidecast, on the other hand, is extremely eccentric to say the least. Since you'll primarily be dealing with the residents of the upper strata of Basel, especially early on, your employers all get weirder than the last, leading to a feeling of, wow, these people are so weird, thank god I'm the only normal one here. Until you remember that the first thing you see in the game is Zephyr getting his brains blown out and Leon attempting suicide, so something's clearly not right with these two. Vacheron continues to be the GOAT. The cast is generally very small, but thanks to that and everyone being so eccentric, it leads to every single character being extremely memorable. What also helps is that this is quite possibly the only Tri-Ace game with a genuinely great dub in both Japanese and English. In Japanese, Zephyr is voiced by Hiro Shimono, Leon by Aya Endo, and Vacheron by Ken Narita. All three of them had some pretty solid careers, and they do a great job.
鉱脈?
ああ、洞窟探検だ。
厄介な仕事なのか?
ああ、ちょっとな。
But Resonance of Fate is one of the few instances where not only is the English dub narratively more fitting, but also shockingly better than the Japanese one in a lot of ways.
A mine?
Yep, time for some spelunking.
Not one of those easy jobs, is it?
Nope, probably not.
Zephyr and Leanne are voiced by Scott Manville and Jessica DeKitcho respectively, and they do a fantastic job, while Vacheron is voiced by Nolan North of all people, in what might just be one of my favorite performances from him to date.
More work, I'm guessing.
We have to protect the lovely Leanne, even if it means our lives.
Yeah, what about when she's not so lovely?
Not to worry. She's always lovely when she's working.
Should I be worried?
No need for worry when you're with us, sweet cakes.
It's official. I'm worried.
They help elevate the cast a lot, and the voices for the side characters are just a stack, with actors like Jason Marsden, Kirk Thornton, and Charles Martinet to name a few. You can really tell that they wanted this game to appeal to the Western market, and well, we'll get to how that worked out later. The cast and the setting really are the bread and butter of this game, and don't get me wrong, the overarching narrative is by no means bad, but it really drags and is pretty much spoon-fed to you over the course of several completely unrelated side gigs that the party undertakes, because the world and characters are just that much more compelling and important. Now that we've got the cast and world and characters out of the way, let's talk about the highlight of the game. End of Eternity has got to have one of the coolest combat systems I've ever seen in an RPG, and there's nothing else quite like it. At the start of the turn, you can choose which character takes their action first, and then you're given free reign. You can move about the areas, select which of the two equipped weapons you want to use, or if you have two of the same, you can dual wield them, and attack. Every minor action, except for swapping your weapon, uses up part of your action gauge. Once it runs out, your turn automatically ends and you swap to the next character. When you want to attack, you first need to take aim at the enemy and wait for your shot to charge. And you can charge as many shots at a target as you have level proficiency with that weapon. So at level 5 you can charge it 5 times, and at level 100 you can charge it 100 times. We'll get back to leveling later. Mind you, if you run out of action points or get attacked while charging, it'll automatically cancel your attack. And if you don't have a certain equipment piece, you also won't shoot at all unless you manually pull the trigger, even if you already filled up some of the charges before the time ran out. Piece of advice, buy free auto triggers as soon as possible and never take them off. The closer you are to an enemy, the faster your attacks charge. The enemies only move or attack when you do, and function off of the same exact systems as your trio. However, this also means that you can interrupt their attacks in the same way that they can interrupt yours. There's also cover you can hide behind to avoid some damage depending on the map, and generally a lot of the arena layouts leave room for a lot of strategic positioning, though do mind that attacking will end your turn no matter how much of your action gauge is left. The real star of the show here though are the hero actions. At any point during your turn, you can initiate a run over a predetermined path. During this you can attack freely as you're still running, and you can extend your travel time by jumping and doing sick-ass maneuvers. You do less damage while doing this, and your shots are less accurate, but you can do so much more that it seriously adds up. On top of that, everything from your position relative to the enemy you're targeting to the amount of charges completely changes what kind of attack you're going to be doing, and the spread of your shots might even end up hitting surrounding enemies. Changing targets mid-run will reset your charges, so it becomes imperative to plan your turns out ahead of time. When you shoot an enemy while running towards them, you can also launch them into the air, allowing you to either go for a free bonus shot, or jumping in order to smash them into the floor for extra damage. Every time you use a hero action, you gain resonance with your party. Have enough, and you can use a triple attack wherein all 3 characters use a hero action turn simultaneously, which can lead to some insane damage because of something we'll discuss later. To use a hero action to begin with though, you need to use a bezel, which are these little squares at the bottom of the screen. Your life depends entirely on these things. See, whenever you get attacked, you don't actually take damage. Instead, you take blue scratch damage. Once you take enough scratch damage for it to cover your entire health bar, you get launched into the air, and one of your bezels breaks. When this happens, it gets broken into multiple pieces, and to restore it, you need to collect all of them on the map. But if an enemy gets them, they get healed instead. Lose all of your bezels, and you enter critical condition. When this happens, swallow your pride, my man. Pay the game $500 and retry. You fucked up. While in critical, everyone starts pissing themselves. You can no longer run, you lose action points way faster, you attack significantly slower with every single one of your movements becoming comically exaggerated, and most importantly, you take actual damage. And boy do enemies hit like a truck, because guess what? If you're hit even once, you instantly take all of the scratch damage at once. The only way to restore bezels and get out of critical other than collecting them is by killing an enemy or breaking one of their shields. See, some enemies have shields on certain parts of their bodies. If you attack them from a direction with a shield on it, you'll instead be damaging the shields and not them. And this transitions me to the last major component that makes up the combat. Since all 3 characters are pretty much the same, the main focus is instead on the weapons. There's 3 types: pistols, machine guns, and grenades. Machine guns can't kill enemies and only do scratch damage, but in exchange, they do significantly more damage and melt shields, while the other 2 actually damage enemy health directly and also immediately convert all scratch damage into full damage. Think of it kind of like how plasma and bullet weapons systems work in Halo. This leads me to the way that leveling works in this game. Instead of a traditional leveling system, this game goes for something like the skill leveling in Final Fantasy II and the Romancing Saga games. Every type of weapon levels up individually the more you use it, and your total level, maximum health, and maximum carry weight, we'll get to that in a bit, is comprised of the total of all three. So if Fashion is level 2 in grenades, 5 in a machine gun, and 10 in pistols, he actually has level 17. However, equipping items counts as an equipment piece on its own, and there's only a maximum of 1 grenade box. On top of that, you also don't get more pistols and machine guns until much later on. So you are constantly forced to swap around your gear amongst all three and rethink your strategies as you work them up from nothing. Leveling up the character is also how you unlock new skills that can proc during fights. Though they're so situational, I completely forgot about them. And since we're still on the subject of guns, let's talk about customization. There's a total of 3 pistols and 3 machine guns in the game that all have slightly varying stats from one another. However, the main way you adjust your guns is with definitely very legal weapon modification. Officer, I promise I'm allowed to carry this thing. Mechanically, this is just adding different buffs to your gun with a really cool connection piece system until you've added so many parts that you go over your maximum carry weight limit. In reality though, it's inevitably going to lead to you trying to add as many silencers as humanly possible on a handgun. It's honestly really funny. I call this one the Abe Killer. I actually showed my gun-obsessed friend the customization, and he had a stroke so bad he ended up giving me a detailed 30-minute rundown on why each and every one of my very legal builds would never work in real life. It was great. That's the combat done. And man, what a fucking system. Unfortunately, I have one very big problem with it. Its leveling system inevitably leads to a forced grind, as enemies quickly get stronger. So you'll often have to go to the arena, replaying the same stages repeatedly until you've got everyone's weapons up to keep their HP high enough. However, I will say that you can do some absolutely insane shit even with a massive level gap between you and the enemies. You can definitely take down a level 30 boss at level 10 if you know what you're doing, though that's not very likely to happen because this game is fucking brutal. Seriously, this might just be one of the most difficult RPGs I've ever played, and it's got 10 difficulties at that. You really have to properly think through and strategize for every minor possibility, and a single mistake can and will get you killed, because if just one of the 3 dies, it's game over. Load your save. You can retry the battle from the beginning, but that'll cost you 500 bucks. And if you want to refill your vessels at the start, well, that's 10,000. Which is as expensive as the first optional gun you can buy. Calling Resonance of Fate unforgiving would be an understatement, and the mechanical skill ceiling to its combat is staggeringly high, and unfortunately, they also don't make it very easy to learn either. The tutorial is entirely missable, and it's actually possible to get into a random encounter before you even get there, as they can take place on any back alley tile. Random encounters are fundamentally the same as any other fight, but with the addition that sometimes the enemies have a leader unit who ends the entire battle when killed. The entire combat system can be really confusing for a first-time player, but once it clicks you can have such a blast with it, and god does it look badass at that. I don't think there's any other game that captures the pure frantic essence of a western action movie as well as this one. Eat your heart out, Matrix. Unfortunately, there is one part of the gameplay that I fucking despise. The world map makes me want to kill myself. Every chapter you get these hex squares either through story moments or as enemy loot drops, and in order to move around the world map, you first need to create them by linking these awfully shaped hex squares together. If the tiles on the ground are colored, then you can only place the hex roads of the same color onto them. Sometimes you'll find treasure chests containing items underneath as well. It's a really stupid and annoying system that serves no purpose other than to piss you off. The worst part is, you can softlock yourself because of it. See, early on, you'll have to go to your first dungeon, which is covered by 3 red squares. And you need at least 2 hex roads to unlock it. You're only given 4, of which you need to use at least 3 with only a single reserve. Now say you've somehow fucked it up and used all 4 without unlocking the dungeon. Well, too bad, reload your last save or restart the entire game, because there is no other way to get any more red roads. They become normal enemy drops, but only after you've cleared out the dungeon. Whoever designed this system needs to be robbed and beaten within an inch of his life in a seedy alleyway, ideally having his naked body dumped somewhere in a dumpster in the worst place on earth. Quebec. Other than that though, goddamn are the game systems phenomenal. There is one more component to the game that I neglected to mention until now. The soundtrack is fantastic. The music was composed by both Koei Tanaka, whom I talk about way too often on this channel for some reason, and Motoi Sakuraba, whose other works include the Tales of games, Dark Souls 1, and Tri-Ace's very own Star Ocean and Valkyrie Profile, which I still consider to be some of his best work to date. But good lord, if this game doesn't come close. Remember the wonderful juxtaposition I mentioned earlier between the characters in and out of battle? The music plays a massive part in enhancing that dynamic. Sakuraba was only told to give the music an old-timey vibe, without any clear direction or even the need for a leitmotif, while Tanaka was given total creative freedom. The only explicit directive that they received was to make their music contrast each other's. Tanaka handled mostly the out-of-battle areas, resulting in these relaxing, often very lively tracks, while Sakuraba handled the combat music, giving it a very industrial, distinct tone, many songs incorporating the sounds of machinery being worked as part of their bassline. However, that's just for the basic battle tracks, because the game actually has a form of dynamic music. The moment you start a hero action, the combat music naturally shifts into a much faster, louder rock reimagining of itself, with a big focus on electric guitars. It sounds like a small thing, but it enhances the atmosphere by so much, and it seriously makes you feel like a total badass when you blow enemies into the air and smash them back down. Conversely, the music that plays when you enter critical really lets you know that you've utterly fucked up. It's loud, screechy, borderline yelling at you to get the fuck out of there as fast as you can. I really can't stress enough just how much the music does for the tone of the game. And that's Resonance of Fate, or End of Eternity, one of the most overlooked games of its era, and one of the most overlooked RPGs of all time. And really, overlooked is the right word, as most people who played it at the very least liked it. It's just so wonderful and unique that it's hard not to get invested, and SEGA was convinced that this could be the next big thing. For one, there was a manga titled End of Eternity: The Secret Hours that ran between 2010 and 2012, and I mean, it's okay I guess. It basically follows just another side gig for the party, but it's honestly kind of boring. The art is okay, but lacks to convey even a fraction of the action of the game, and the party's dynamic is nowhere near as well shown off. I guess it's an okay time waster, but nothing you'd miss sleep over missing. After that, Zephyr, Leon, and Vacheron were put into both Project Cross Zone games, and man are they as fun as ever in them. They play off of the entire cast so well, and bring up such a fun energy to every scene. There's something inherently really funny about seeing Vacheron trying to flirt with every woman in the game, and egging on the rest of the cast just because he knows he can get away with it. He just likes fucking with people. Other than that, the only other acknowledgement of the series was in a costume for one Hatsune Miku rhythm game. Something tells me that there's not a lot of overlap between these two audiences. As you probably guessed, the game didn't do too well. Maybe it was because their target audience, who were obsessed with Battlefield and Call of Duty at the time, couldn't care less about RPGs. Or maybe it was the total lack of proper advertisement. Or, just maybe, it was releasing a super experimental game exclusively for the PS3 and 360 at the start of the year. Though, realistically, it was a combination of all of these factors and more. But the moment SEGA realized that the game wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be, they completely abandoned it, essentially giving the rights entirely to Tri-Ace, who remastered the game in 2018 for the PS4 and PC. This is by far the best version of the game, though the PC version specifically has some minor issues here and there. For one, it looks worse than the PS4 one, it also has some performance issues, and if you want to use the HD textures, you need to download a 60GB free update. Unfortunately, this version also didn't do particularly well. Maybe it's because they basically dropped it overnight with no fanfare, or maybe it's because they're still trying to sell a 15-year-old game for $35 without ever putting it on sale. You know, this whole story sounds familiar. A groundbreaking, super creative game unlike anything else in its genre is released on a system with no audience for it, gets remastered to no fanfare, and is abandoned by its publisher after a bunch of collaborative cameos and a spin-off manga that nobody cares for that is set in a steampunk world on a giant isolated structure with music by Koei Tanaka. This is just Gravity Rush again. Now, ignoring the fact that this is the third steampunk series with music by Koei Tanaka that I've talked about on this channel, with two of them being SEGA IPs not actually developed by SEGA, and appearances in both Cross-Zone games, it really is a coincidence that I decided to cover this game so soon after Gravity Rush. But their stories really do mirror each other in a lot of ways, and unfortunately, they're not the only ones. History has a tendency to repeat itself, and it's not at all uncommon for games to end up this way. The gaming industry is like any other, focused first and foremost on profit, and it really doesn't matter what the circumstances are. If you can't rake in the cash, you're going in the trash. But unlike Gravity Rush, Resonance of Fate is as accessible as it'll ever be. Sure, the PC port has issues, but it's fully functional and runs even on 2012 hardware. The biggest hurdle is the price tag. Though the game does have a lot of content at least, I urge you to try this game out if you have even the slightest interest, because there's nothing quite like it, and there probably never will be again. And man, it's one hell of a blast. If you've watched this far, then I can't thank you enough. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate a like, comment, and subscription. With all of that said, I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. Cheers!
Sweat. Resonance of Fate. That's that one. Devil may cry for, nigga. Devil may fucking cry, nigga. Sweat.